Only acknowledge your wrongdoing. Yeah. Right. What was it? Unfaithful. I'm faithful. Yes. Yes. I'm faithful. Yeah. What else?
Lush tree.
Lush tree. I won't stay angry forever. Yes. Beautiful thing. Okay, so we really believe that Scripture is a living text. Is this mic a little hot? Would it be better to do a little, let's do a little a handheld situation. So we really believe that Scripture speaks out in a living way. And if there was a word or phrase that stuck out to you, it might be God trying to say something to you during this worship service. So please continue to meditate on that word or phrase as we continue our service. So, for folks who are here, I know that a lot of folks at New City are new to Christianity, maybe new to the Bible. And just as a little bit of context, here's the kind of the layout of the Bible, very generally speaking. We just had a reading from Jeremiah, which actually is right. It's in the Old Testament. It's it's the second largest prophet book in the Old Testament, Jeremiah. And so we're reading through Isaiah and Jeremiah in the sermon series that we have right now called, oh my gosh, it's been so good, Gospel Futurism. This series has been lit, y'all. Like, I'm so grateful for this. So the idea with Gospel Futurism, for folks who are here for the first time, is we took a nod to Afrofuturism, which is an artistic movement in America that is creating visual art, songs, architecture even, that reflects an imagination for a future wherein Black people are free. So it's using like sci-fi themes and kind of like different fantasy imaginations for a new world where Black people are free, so that we can work backwards from that imagination instead of trying to just make incremental steps moving forward. So like Black Panther was a very significant exercise in gospel, or in Afrofuturism. And so we're trying to, in this series, Gospel Futurism, we're trying to imagine what would the world be like if the church got our stuff together and started living into the gospel today, right away. And then start imagining the world backwards from that, instead of just like incrementally taking these baby steps forward. And so, this is relevant because yesterday we had our movement forward! Oh, we made it! Hallelujah! Check! We solved homophobia in the church. It's done! It's done! So a lot of our series has been in preparation for this event, and if you are visiting for the first time, we invite you to go to the New City Facebook page to watch series from earlier in this series around what our gospel imagination is in this community. And we always believe in the power of the Spirit moving through folks, and so we want to continue to keep the conversation going. And so, do you all have like a yellow piece of paper or a quarter sheet? For the folks who are at the conference, this will look very familiar. There were leftovers. We believe in reusing. So, I just want you to take a second to reflect on the following question. And this is similar to last week's question if you were here last week. I would like you to just take a second to reflect on what is the problem to which the church is the solution? What can the church uniquely do that other organizations and movements cannot? So we want you to just reflect on that a little bit, and you'll be turning this in later, and we'll compile it, and it'll continue to influence our sermon series. So we'll just give you a little bit of time, and maybe Ari can noodle on the piano for a little bit. Yes, thanks. Writing down some last thoughts. Honestly, like my favorite responses to these are from folks who didn't grow up in the church and who don't identify as Christian yet, because that's where the really like the marrow is, right? Like that's so interesting. So whatever your perspective, wherever you're coming from, we are so grateful for your response to that. I would now invite you to write any identities that you care to mention on that response. It's helpful for us to see, like, wow, 100% of the trans people in our community spoke to a certain theme, or 100% of the people of color in our community, or white folks in our community spoke to a certain theme. And then, on this, I invite you to think about how much you identify as a follower of Jesus, and then just put a corresponding number of stars on that piece of paper. So if you do not identify as a follower of Jesus, put 1 star on the paper. We do need you to put a star, because otherwise I'll just assume you didn't hear this part. So 1 star means no. 3 means yes, I am a follower, I do identify as a follower of Jesus. And 2 is not no. So like kind of in between there. Yes. And I know that sometimes this can be a little complicated. So like don't write 1 star and then write yes. Or like don't write I don't know how to draw a star on, right? These are real answers. So yes, if you just write 3 stars, you know, that'd be cool. Okay. So first of all, I just really want to express my gratitude again for the support of this community as Dana and I have been planning into our movement forward. It's taken up a fair amount of time, I think it's fair to say. A couple of hours here and there, every waking moment of our lives, over the past couple of weeks. And we really saw this, we decided to do that as a community because we felt like this was an outpouring of the witness of New City Church to the nation and to the world. We had an attendee register for our movement forward who's coming from the Philippines to be at our movement forward, right? And we had folks from every conference, for sure every jurisdiction.
Every jurisdiction.
Yes. So like huge geographic regions of people coming together. And so we're grateful for that. And at our movement forward, something that I brought into the space was a quote from that I shared last week from Chung Hyun Kyung, which, by the way, happy Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. The happiest month of the year, in addition to Pride Month and Black History Month. Yes, the whole year. And this is what I want to kind of set as our theological vision, as we imagine a gospel futurism. I think in order to really heal the world, we need the wisdom of darkness. Anyone? This can be the third world, dark people, women, or our own shadows. All the things that we do not want to confront with ourselves. So we project them onto others and call them terrorists. So I think that we need an age of endarkenment for a while, not enlightenment to heal the world. An age of endarkment, not enlightenment to heal the world. So this came up at the panel. So I'm sitting on this panel with 4 other academicians, theologians, pastors, kind of big picture church people. And I talked about how we've tried an age of enlightenment. We've tried modernity and separation and isolation. We've tried patriarchy and control. We tried domination, and it got us to where we are now. National crises of people, national crises of loneliness, global crises of climate change, violence in our streets. We've tried the age of enlightenment. And maybe it is time, maybe God is calling us to beckon in a new age, an age of endarkment, an age when we listen to how Christ is alive in people who are poor and down and out, where Christ is alive in people of color, in the countries that we continue to systematically and economically oppress, where Christ is alive even in your own heart, in your own trauma, in your own fears, in your own undoing. Christ, the tomb is opening up, and Christ is coming out in resurrection inside of you, inside of our communities, if we have the ears to hear and the eyes to see. If we have the ears to hear and the eyes to see. So this is my posture as we're going into our movement forward. I was one of the 3 co-conveners nationally who kind of brought all of this together. And the goal of this conference for me, kind of like Tyler's little personal goal, was that the way that we relate to each other might reflect an age of endarkment kind of sensibility, and that we can finally move beyond this tyrannical patriarchy that we've been organizing ourselves with really since the get-go. We believe that change is possible. So that was my posture. For those of you who are new to New City Church, our mission is to create inspired and skilled communities that join God in transforming the world. And so I want to just talk a little bit about the skill. I want to talk about logistically just how I did it, because I believe that any one of you might be called on to build this next thing. We really believe in giving skills to people, because it's hard to stop a movement if everyone knows how to do the things, right? Yeah. It's easy to stop a movement if all the knowledge is contained in one person. And so I want to put this out. I want to talk about skills, and then I want to talk a little bit about theologically and the imagination that came out of this conference. So, skill-wise, honestly, the first mistake that the conservatives made was winning. The first mistake that the conservatives made was passing the traditional plan. Because if the traditional plan didn't pass, all of the kind of centrist white folks who are just kind of happy in their churches would have said gay people kind of have their options. There's a Methodist church on the street that I'm pretty sure does that stuff. We're still okay. We're just kind of being where we are. But honestly, the imagination of enlightenment, the domination, the control, which penned the traditional plan, which penned in, for people who aren't familiar with the traditional plan, it was like a document that is dripping with blood. It's a document that said, we are going to enforce minimum mandatory punishments for anyone who looks at a gay person. Basically, pastors, we can't ordain gay people, we can't observe weddings. If you know about a person who participated in the ordination or marriage or wedding, then you're responsible for reporting that, and you'll be in trouble if you don't tell on that person. If you're a bishop and you oversee this and you hear about this, then you're in trouble. All of very, very heightened control, domination mindset, and ultimately I believe it was derived out of a deep seat of fear, and the good news of the gospel is that fear will not win. And we saw that in the response to the traditional plan. Because all of a sudden, even people who were, they're not really marching in pride. They're not really that thrilled about LGBT pastors or marriage, but they looked at the anarchic, tyrannical, enforcement-based, fear-based rule of the traditional plan and said, that is not the church that I grew up with. And so all of a sudden, we have folks like Sean Moore's church, in The Beloved, which is a church planted in East St. Paul. It's a community of color. It's predominantly black folks who are still kind of having conversations in their own way about LGBT stuff, and they were mobilized against the traditional plan, because mandatory minimum sentencing is the same mechanism that's used to oppress people of color in our society, right? This is how people who are selling like an ounce of weed get like 10 years in prison, right? Like this is how like these things escalate, and we have folks like just like a bunch of folks in suburban and even rural areas in Minnesota, like just totally dove white, lily white churches who are looking at these policies and they're like, wait a second, but Tyler was the annual conference preacher and he was nice. And I don't want to, this is like Minnesota talk. By the way, if you're coming from outside of the country, why are we punishing nice people? Isn't nice the greatest virtue of them all? Welcome to the Midwest. So, there's Tyler. Tyler was nice. Why are we punishing Tyler? And so all of a sudden there's this older church lady up in arms, like they're grabbing their knit shawls and they're strapping it real tight and they're like, wait a second, we're not gonna stand for this. That's not the tradition that I grew up in. And this traditional plan is a misnomer because it's taking it from my hands and the hands of my folks into something that I do not like. So all of a sudden, so the Conservatives just made a huge misplay in winning with a plan that would mobilize, honestly, way more people than they thought it would. And so, like, way more people than they thought they would. And all of a sudden, like, even we hear rumors of the drafters of the traditional plan being like, shoot, we now have, like, a very, very destabilized denomination. The metal is hot, and depending on how we strike it and who gets to strike it is going to determine a lot. So this is the ethos that we started organizing, and I just right after General Conference, Adam Hamilton tweeted. Adam Hamilton is the pastor of the largest church in the U.S. Methodism, right? Yeah. So Adam Hamilton, like $72 million apportionments, like not even the budget, it's like 10% of their budget is $72 million that they give to the church, or something like that. It's like, I'm making up numbers. I don't really do numbers, so. I mean, but like, Adam Hamilton was furious about this, and he's like, hey, I'm gonna have a gathering, we're gonna get every single like mover and shaker in the country together, and we're gonna talk this through. Because Adam Hamilton is a farm boy in Kansas who has progressed to the center, and he's like, no, we gotta do something about this. And I'm like, wow, how cool, like what a good display of allyship. Someone who has a lot of resources is leveraging those to bring people to the table. That's good allyship. I tweet Adam Hamilton back, I respond, and I'm like, hey, I feel like this is self-evident, but you should make sure to center marginalized voices in this conversation. Like, you should make sure to center people of color, POC, people of color voices, and queer voices, obviously, because these policies most directly affect them. Like, that's self-evident, right? Surely this is not something that needs to be contested. And I look at these responses to Adam Hamilton, and Adam Hamilton responded to every single one of these except for Tyler Sitz as he's going on. And I'm like, interesting. Okay, this is like activating a little bit of my Enneagram 7 fear. Like, we're gonna okay. Maybe we just need to push a little bit further. So I made a page on my website that was like totally just like a dreamy kind of like, wouldn't it be cool if we had a gathering of POC and queer people? If you're interested, then register for it. I don't have a team, I don't have a venue, but if you're interested, if like 50 people want to do this, then we'll put in some work for it, but whatever. And which, by the way, is the first move, right? Like, don't plan the giant thing if you don't know that people are interested in the thing, right? Like, put out the word before you put in all the work. This is like a lean startup kind of mentality. Put out the word first, make sure that you have a confirmed list of people who really care about this, and then put the action into it, right? I get in touch with M. Barclay, and M. Barclay, who has been a trans leader in the church who has been doing a ton of organizing around General Conference was like, hey, there's another group of people who are already kind of thinking through this. Is there a way that you could collaborate together? So I get in touch with like a whole slew of people who have already been scheming this. So second learning, if you know that there is a movement about to happen, if a bunch of people in independent locations are already scheming the same thing, like you know that the Holy Spirit is threading herself through our imagination, if a bunch of people are already... So all of us we're like, yeah, we should do a thing. I think it should be like before Adam Hamilton's gathering and before annual conference. So let's just pick May, arbitrarily May. And we pick the date based off of like, can you come to it? Yeah, I can come to it. Does that work for you? Okay, 3 of us can come to it. So let's just do May 17th and 18th. And it just kind of like in the first days we were like, if we could get 100 people in a room, that would be amazing. Like if we could get 100 people that are really dedicated to this work, then we would have the critical mass that would legitimize the voice that is necessary to bring it to a national stage. So third learning is like, think about what critical mass you need in order to significantly shift things in how things are going on, right? So it's not just the number of people that you need to feel good about yourself, it's the number of people that you want to shift. So we start communicating through Slack, and all of a sudden, we put out like a website, a registration page, and this stuff goes gangbusters. Like people are registering for it basically like minutes after we click publish for the registration page. And they just start rolling in, right? Because not only are there denominational leaders who are like, I'm thirsty, some denominational leaders, some of whom are in this room, by the way, who are like, I'm so thirsty for something that's not just like, how do we get the most number of people and the most amount of money into a new thing, regardless of the cost to queer lives, right? Which is like kind of the tenor of a lot of these conversations. And instead saying like, what happens if we put queer liberation first? So anyways, a ton of people started going in. We originally scouted, Dan and I originally scouted out a venue that could fit like 150 people, and the church was like, yeah, we're gonna have like a kids musical rehearsal running upstairs, but you only need like one room, right? And we're like, we believe in the Spirit, and we believe that we need something that's a little bit more than that. And so that's when we got on board to Lake Harriet. God had been doing a good thing at Lake Harriet United Methodist, because all of Lake Harriet was furious about this. And so all of a sudden, not only do we have a larger venue, but we have a mobilized community who can't wait to get their hands on this. And Lake Harriet, like, relayed their floors, they painted walls, they washed windows, they hand scrubbed the furniture for this event because they couldn't wait to be part of something to channel their energy. And ultimately, this is what like the pastoral gift of community organizing is you're giving people a place to channel their rage and turn it into ministry. This is the sacred compost pile that we're talking about. Like we have this raw material of rage and grief, and ministry means providing a compost pile where that rage and grief can turn into the formation of beloved community in the world. So all of these folks started like madly going around, and then all of a sudden, people are like, I want people who are attending this conference to stay at my home because I don't want them to have to buy a hotel room. So we had like a couple dozen homestays. And people volunteering their home, people stepping up, people calling me all the time. I want to be a driver, I want to provide food, I want to do snacks, I want to do greeting. And all of a sudden, all of these pieces are coming together. Meanwhile, on the design side, we're like, how in the world are we going to convene people for what was ultimately 12 hours, 4 hours on a Friday, 8 hours on a Saturday, and get anything done that will actually change what's going on. And so we devised this really fun, we can start distributing. We devised this facilitation strategy that's really, do any of you know Adrienne Maree Brown?
Yes.
So Adrienne Maree Brown, if you haven't read Emergent Strategy,
yes.
Listen, it's like the movement book of 2018, I think is when it came out. Like, it's like a very significant book. It deeply influenced how we do things together. So we can just pass up the both right now. So Adrienne Maree Brown talks about like, how can we apply biomimicry? How can we learn from nature about how to create our movements? And the observation is that a lot of our movements right now under patriarchy are built like a herd of lions or like a wolf pack where there's one alpha, and then people are supposed to like follow behind the alpha. And instead, her imagination was, what if instead of a pack of lions, we were a flock of starlings? So starlings are these birds. They fly millions to a flock. And they all get to a place where they want to go, even when one person is not leading. There's no head starling. Starlings only track 7 other birds, and they're the birds that are around them. So starlings can dynamically navigate challenges and air drafts and in real time create strategies that get to where they want to go. And so all of what we're trying to distribute is like ultimately, like, how do we get a starling mentality, a flock mentality, a movement mentality, instead of an institution building mentality to what we're doing? And how do we like unleash people to do that work? Because what we don't want is like a committee of pure queers who get to decide what's woke enough to do action, and a review process that will inevitably delay action. Like, we want people in real time to be able to be making movements that are guided and grounded in the values laid out by our movement forward. And so, so you'll see we had 3 rounds of action, and I'm explaining this because, like, again, you might be called on to do the next one of these, if not for the United Methodist Church, for any number of movements, right? So, so first we had people, raise your hand if you're at our movement forward, by the way. Yeah. So, so we had people sit around tables and respond to questions using those yellow pieces of paper, and then we had a sticky wall to put those ideas up. We knew that, especially in gatherings like this, there were going to be a lot of Enneagram 8s and 1s. Anyone? A lot of people who are like really strong, really opinionated, and honestly, like, as we were seeing people register, like, there were some white folks that we knew would take up a lot of space. And so we knew that we couldn't just do a simple town hall where we passed around a mic. We knew that we couldn't have like a speaker. And so instead we had people respond to these questions so that we could get a lot of ideas out at the same time. And then we did this gallery walk. So we had people do a walk through all of the walls and write down themes for both values and actions. And so, like, this was in service to us wanting to draft a proclamation together. I'll get that in a second. So, so we had people write down their gallery walk, and then we had people sit in tables based off of what was most exciting to them and to create an action plan. Now, note that no one organization owns these action plans. We wanted to put this into the hands of the people to start these action plans. And, like, folks from the tracks can talk about this during the community talkback, but, like, there was some ideas that were like, yeah, we should just be a church that's good. And it was like, okay, interesting use of time. And then there were other plans that were really interesting that we never would have thought of, but and that we wouldn't necessarily be able to like own as an organization, but we knew they would be valuable. So like people who were like, I think that we need a theological library that lives online, so that we can consult what really Methodism is about, because we get all this spinning and we just need like a place. Or like, I think that we should create a network of solidarity for people who do, like the kind of stuff that's like, yeah, that's a really good idea. If one organization were owning it, it would be done in like 10 months. But if people are on fire about this, you can get going right now. So we had people report those action plans, and then people who were interested in those action plans, even if they weren't in that planning group, could sign on to it, and then we would connect them all through email. All of this is in service. So like I love this because it's like Enneagram 7, you're free, you get to do your own plans, you get to come up with your thing, and you're only committing to the actions that like are most energizing for you. But we knew that it would feel too like wavy dancy if we didn't have some type of punctuation mark. So we decided that we needed to create a proclamation. The proclamation is not a blueprint for a new denomination. It's not a set of marching orders. It's rather a document that will lay out the value and visions of what a liberative church will look like. And so we had a preamble to that proclamation that we had the entire community read. It was basically like Liberation Theology 101. Like, we believe that if we wait, if we delay the liberation of queer people, then we will never have the liberation of queer people. Like, we need to start living into this now, otherwise we will never have it. Because we just spent how long has the prohibition on gay ordination been going on? 46 years? Yeah. Whole bunch of time. Of a lot of like, okay, yeah, we're gonna get there one day. And it hasn't really gotten there yet, right? Like, the progressive movement hadn't changed, and correct me, hasn't changed one punctuation mark of the parts of the Book of Discipline that have prohibited LGBTQ people. One comma, much less the words, right? Like, the rest of the society changed, the rest of society grew. Plants like New City Church started coming up, but like, as far as our Book of Discipline, it has been a standstill for 50 years. And so the proclamation said, like, we need this now, and the vision and values will come from the gathering of people who are here at our movement forward. And so we got like all of these action plans, all of those papers that were up on the wall, and we have curators who are looking for themes, God bless them. This is like hundreds of pieces of paper, by the way. Curators who are looking for themes, and then they're gonna draft a proclamation that came from this. And people will have the opportunity to sign on to the proclamation. Am I forgetting anything? Oh, we also had we knew that if it was just people coming together and brainstorming, that it wouldn't be enough. So we wanted to have some type of provocative arrowhead kind of thing. So instead of having a keynote speaker, we had a keynote panel, of which I was on. And just to kind of get the churn going. And I'll tell you what, organizing this way feels so different from organizing in kind of a lion, what is the lion gathering called? Pride, a lion pride. Oh, that's ironic. Yeah, because sometimes I go to conferences and I leave just feeling this rush because I'm like, they're gonna do it. They are gonna do it. Yay! Someone else is championing this. Like, they are going to do it. This, like, the big, loud, shiny people on the stage are gonna do it, and that means like I can feel good about it. And I didn't feel that like kind of pop of energy from this. Instead, I felt this kind of like groundswell of people saying like, each one of us is going to do this. Each one of us is part of this movement. I am personally responsible for carrying this forward. So that's a little bit of skill building. At the when I was there in the panel, one of the things that I wanted to make sure I communicated is that if we do not center an experience of God in all of our plans, then all of this will fail. All of it will fail. Some of you were still around. Do you remember when I was first planting New City Church and we had like May Fitness Month? It was like 2 or 3 years ago. It was a nightmare. And so Tori, remember Tori was like, I'm a yoga instructor. Who wants to come to Tori's yoga? And a lot of people were like, oh, I would totally show up for that. I love that. Let's do it. So then we had a yoga class. Tori showed up with mats, and 3 people came for the whole month, right? Like, it was so poorly attended. Kai was one of them. It was his first yoga class. Yep, Stephen the intern, who had to be there. Was there, yeah. Good. He would, so 1/3 was compulsory attendance. And what we realized is that, like, if we're going to be the church, then we have to be the church. People all over Minneapolis, if they're looking for a yoga studio, they will not drive by 5 yoga studios to get to New City Church. There are, like, free yoga classes throughout the city that are way better run than anything that we could run, not because Tori's not amazing, but because we are not a yoga studio. There's a kitchen right there, right? Like, we are not a yoga studio. We're not a Zumba studio. We are not a community organizing platform. We are not a shared economic model. We are not a training center. We are a church. And in the age that we are in, we need to have a crystal clear understanding of what the church is supposed to be doing in the age that we're in. Because right now, what I'm seeing at New City Church is people having an embodied experience of the sacred. Somehow the Holy Spirit is showing up not just intellectually, not just in an idealistic kind of way, but in a truly felt kind of way, through singing, through prayer, through getting together and doing the things that Christians have been doing for 2,000 years. And we need to let our solidarity come as a fruit of that natural experience. Our social justice is a fruit of that deep religious experience. But if we cut the process short and just skip to justice, then we will be a very mediocre justice organization. Because we're not built for it, right? Like, a lot of New City Church is dedicated to putting on a worship service because we believe worship services change lives. And by the way, we believe that God is changing your life right now in real time. Not because of what I'm saying, but because of what God is doing. And so, like, this incubator space only makes sense if God is a God who is, like Jeremiah says, faithful. If God is a God who shows up and is faithful for us, continues to be a faithful God who will guide our hearts back to her. God is a God who wants to be in relationship with us, not despite of our traumas and our fears and our deep insecurities about the future, but because of that. God is a God who meets us in the twilight and the dark night and shows us that the dark is sacred. That in the darkness, we discover the darkness of the tomb. And in the sunrise, we discover the resurrection of new life. Not in an intellectual, idealistic way, but through a felt, lived experience in our gut. This is what we are striving for. And I know this is kind of a hard pitch for folks who don't identify as Christian. You're like, I sang the words, I sat in the chair, I did not get like a mystical experience of God. And I get that. The reason why we call worship love training is because it takes practice. Yeah. It just takes practice for you to not just be constantly thinking of like, oh my gosh, this is so weird, this is so weird, this is so weird, right? It takes practice for you to be present with each other, to be in relationship, and to adopt a posture of love. I'll tell you what, when I was getting ready for this, I was just aware of how much vitriol I should be prepared to face. Because there's a lot of people coming from a lot of different places for this conference. Some of them support one plan of action, others support another plan of action. There's some people who feel betrayed by the people coming. And of course, there's a lot of trauma that's going to be acted out in vitriolic ways. So there was that kind of bracing, but also, stuff got real a couple weeks before this conference. Lake Harriet was protested a couple weeks ago by a local affiliate of the Westboro Baptist Church. There were people showing up with signs that says God hates, and then a slur for queer people, outside, like haggling old church women going to Lake Harriet because they were supporting this and hosting this movement. There were protesters outside the windows of the sanctuary, so they had to close the blinds, which by the way is why we had to close the blinds during our conference together. We had to put together a security team to be able to respond to malicious action. this was real. This was real life of one of the top security experts in Minneapolis, who's also an associate pastor, who handled... And a deacon. I mean, deacons are pastors. Is a deacon, yeah, which is what Dan is. I'm an elder. Deacon. Okay, yeah. You're kind of looking into... You're going to appear into like a very Methodist dynamic right now. But a deacon was like, I did security for the Fabulous Four. Final Four. And I did the security for the Super Bowl. I did the security for the Final Four. The Westboro Baptist Church showed up to the Final Four, and I took notes. We need to have a security plan for what is going to go down. And so, like, this was real life. These are queer lives on the line here. This is a gathering wherein, like, if terrorists are going to do things, which is like, white supremacy is a terrorist organization, right? Like if terrorists are going to do things, and they're going to do the things that give us hope, and this gathering is giving us hope. And God calls us to step into bold places that will make white supremacists very, very nervous. If we're going to beckon in the age of endarkenment, it won't be because the age of enlightenment people want to yield that. It is because we are threateningly going to gather in the name of the gospel, because we have felt things that we cannot unfeel. We have felt a spirit in our heart that we cannot unfeel. I was there in a worship service preparing my heart for the weeks ahead. This was weeks out before our movement forward. And I was like, God, there's so much vitriol and there's so much potential for violence. And what if this is all my fault? Like if something really bad happens? And the image that God gave me was a lily. Abundant and soft, but standing strong. And God says, offer a lily to the people of this hurting world, and we will see a transformation like we cannot believe. Offer a lily to the vitriol, to the people who are desperately looking for solutions, and create an imagination of resurrection first. Create an imagination of faithfulness, of God showing up, of the same God who who redeemed the church of that plantation through the spiritual songs. The same God who organized farm workers in California, the same God who accompanied queer people in hospital beds as they were dying from AIDS and no one wanted to touch them, the same God who brought forth life to New City Church is the same God who's going to see us through to tomorrow. And we need to create a posture of love, openness, and joy for us to receive that new world and live into it now. Otherwise, we will never get there. We cannot wait for the kingdom. The kingdom needs to happen now in our bodies. Otherwise, we will never see the kingdom in our communities. We need to live into a bold love that stares the terrorists straight in the eyes and says, you can take me down, but I am part of a movement that you cannot stop. I am like the nightfall. You cannot control the sun. And we are a people of the night who are finding new life in tombs that people have tried to bury for a long, long time. We are a new people of a new rising, and you cannot stop us. Let us be a garden for the future. Provide abundantly for generations to come. And know that God is a God who is faithful. Amen. Our community formation facilitator is sick today, but Dan and I are going to co-facilitate the talk back. We really believe that the community, if it wasn't evident yet, we believe that the Spirit is moving through your lives. And we want to the sermon began here, but it continues in in your input. So we want to hear from you. We're going to just take 1 minute just to write down a takeaway. This is a good time to use that white worship companion on the back. There's a takeaway box. This is the time to listen to the Spirit.